Broadcasting from the heart of downtown Boston, EIV's only political program. This is The Spin Room with Jordan Rummel and Mick Jacobs, and on Policy Breakdown, Megan Allen. For today's news, you're watching The Spin Room.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's episode of The Spin Room. I'm your host, Jordan Rummel, and alongside me is my co-host, Mick Jacobs.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us, everyone. Later on the show, we have David Coman Heidi talking to our own Megan Allen about animal rights. And after, joining us on panel is Julia Schuster, the Citizenship Coordinator for Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition, or rather MIRA Coalition for short. Bianca Padra-Ocasio, who is a student member of Understanding Nation Immigration Through Education. And finally, our Spin Room's own correspondent, Felix Chen, is back to join us on this week's immigration policy-themed panel. But first, tonight's headlines.
The United States has been fixated on the events occurring in the Ukraine, but why do we care? It's a geopolitical game between Cold War adversaries, and naturally the nation is hooked. While U.S. leaders pay close attention to the situation in Ukraine, it seems unusual why they also wouldn't be paying equal attention to the brutal and consequential protests happening in the oil-rich country of Venezuela.
In Venezuela, violent and nonviolent protests have been ongoing as a response to skyrocketing inflation. At least 32 have died in the conflict. Venezuelan interim President Maduro responded to the nationwide shortages of necessary foods and goods by making a deal. The deal included over $1 billion worth of aid.
President Maduro blames the food shortages on the protesters. Maduro also faults the CIA, who wish to destabilize the government, sabotage the oil industry, and trigger power cuts, all of which would benefit the U.S. That's why the United States' 2014 foreign operations budget includes $5 million for supporting opposition activity in Venezuela.
Despite obvious ways the U.S. can benefit from a successful Venezuelan revolution, the media is treating this as a be-right story, at best. Instead, mainstream media is directing America's attention to the missing plane.
CNN breaking news.
And a Malaysia Airlines plane carrying 239 people bound for Beijing is missing.
New satellite images of objects.
Well, let's talk about the scenario of hijacking, of a major malfunction, of a collision.
Cable news continues to report news without any information about Flight 370. Breaking news, the pilot had a mystery phone call. Breaking news, more like broken news.
In other actual news, Brigadier General Jeffrey Sinclair is let off the hook after being accused of sexually assaulting a female subordinate. The high-ranking official was originally charged with forcing a subordinate to perform oral sex on him. After pleading guilty to a handful of lesser charges, including adultery, Sinclair gets off almost scot-free with just a $20,000 fine. Lead defense attorney Richard Sheff released the following statement. General Sinclair and his family are deeply grateful that the Army they served for 27 years ultimately did the right thing. We are grateful he has been exonerated of crimes that he did not commit. The Pentagon released data that says nearly 26,000 sexual assault incidents occurred in 2012. Just over 10% of that number were reported.
Ryan Shapiro, who is a prolific requester of government records, filed a lawsuit this week against the NSA, CIA, FBI, and DIA. The activist hopes to find out what roles the U.S. intelligence community played in Nelson Mandela's 1962 arrest, and why it took until 2008 for Nelson Mandela to get off the terrorist watch list. Naturally, the NSA blocked his Freedom of Information Act request, arguing espionage and national defense.
Spitting in the face of such things like science, or commonly accepted fact, a new Gallup poll reports that 4 in 10 Americans still believe that the dangers of global warming are exaggerated. Thing is, 4 in 10 Americans, climate change is melting the world's ice. Greenland is currently the case study because it's melting so drastically.
Oh, wait, Jim, this is the big pizza starting to calve. Let me call you back.
All that.
Okay, bye.
If Greenland fully melts, which is plausible, sea levels will rise 22 to 23 feet, which means the majority of the world's cities will be underwater.
And lastly, the head of the notoriously anti-gay Westboro Baptist Church, Fred Phelps, passed away last week at the age of 84. Phelps and his caravan of creepy family members gained infamy for their picketing of funerals, denouncing American signs, hating Obama, the Jews, Islam, and the gays. By choosing to have more beef than Kanye West's Twitter account, Phelps actually turned many people on to the gay rights cause. Why? Because everyone loves to hate a common enemy. And Fred Phelps, we can only hope that you are welcomed into those pearly white gates of heaven accordingly.
Now for Policy Breakdown, where our own Megan Allen explains policy with local leaders. For today's show, she'll be speaking with the director of the Humane League, an advocacy organization that works to protect animal rights.
You're watching The Spin Room, and for today's Policy Breakdown, I'm speaking with David Coleman Heidi. He's the director of the Humane League, an organization that speaks up for the actual voiceless animals. He's also an Emerson alum. Thanks for being here with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Megan.
Do you prefer Dave or David?
Feel free to call me Dave or
All right,
David.
cool. Well, hello, Dave. Welcome.
Thank you.
So how did you get started in animal rights advocacy?
Well, unlike a lot of folks in the animal protection movement, I actually didn't grow up as a big animal lover. For me, it was more when in college, actually, and a little bit in high school, learning about factory farming, the way that billions of animals are treated on factory farms. It was really more the rational argument made that there's so many of these innocent beings who have nervous systems just like us, who are suffering out there. And when I started, becoming interested in politics, went to Emerson to study political communication, I decided that with the tools that I learned here, the best place to apply them would be on farm animal issues because there's just such a lack of advocacy going on compared to a lot of the other issues I was caring about. And the fact is that when it comes to farm animal issues, even a little bit of progress literally impacts hundreds of thousands or millions of animals over the coming years. So I decided to focus my work in this arena for those reasons.
So can you elaborate on any of the past things that you guys have done?
Sure. So my group, the Humane League, focuses on a number of things. We do outreach programs where we work with consumers. We promote meat reduction. We also do a lot of corporate policy advocacy. So over the last few years in Boston, for example, we've worked with virtually every college and university, including Emerson, to boycott eggs that are raised on farms that use...
I actually do remember that.
Yeah, that use battery cage confinement systems. We've also worked with some of the largest food corporations in the country to change their policies on those issues. We've worked with schools to implement Meatless Mondays programs. So yeah, we're involved in a number of arenas, but the main thing that ties all of our work together is a focus on what's going to help reduce the largest number of suffering for the largest number of animals.
So what are you guys working on currently?
Currently, well, in Mass, one of the things we're really excited about policy-wise is House Bill 1456, which is a bill to prevent farm animal cruelty. So what that'll do, if implemented, is make it illegal to house animals in cages or stalls that don't allow them to spread their limbs or even turn around. So the main things that it's targeting are actually battery cages, which is where most egg-laying hens are confined in our country, gestation crates for mother pigs, that's a 2-foot by 7-foot crate that they're kept in, and veal crates, which is where young calves are kept to make veal confined so that they don't really grow a lot of muscle. So that's our biggest policy push right now. That's the thing we're watching in the State House. But outside of that, the majority of our work is really spent on advocacy and corporate outreach. We're actually about to launch a pretty exciting corporate campaign targeting Fidelity Investments. They invest a lot in Seaboard Foods. They're one of the largest users of gestation crates for mother pigs in the country. So we're going to be targeting Fidelity for investing so much money in what is, to most people, obvious animal cruelty.
So what is the most challenging aspect of influencing policy?
Well, at this point, the animal protection movement's lucky in that the vast majority of Americans are really on board. For example, the last bill I was talking about in Massachusetts, 90% of voters, a recent poll found, support outlawing the things in the bill, right? Nobody supports animal cruelty, right? So the real issue is about raising awareness. Most folks just don't know what's going on behind the closed doors of factory farms. So it's an issue of informing consumers and voters and making sure that they're either voting with their dollars or, in the case of policy, contacting their legislators and decision makers and making sure that they know that animal cruelty is something on the minds of the people in Massachusetts.
So why should college students get involved?
Well, I think that, listen, I care about a wide range of political issues, right? And when I was at Emerson, I actually volunteered on all sorts of things, whether it was poverty or gay rights or anti-war initiatives, all things that are really close to me. But the fact of the matter is, when it comes to getting on board with the movement at the ground level, animal rights or animal protection is really exciting. It's an area where I mean, the sad fact of the matter is things are about as bad as they could be. We're raising 11 billion animals each year. Most of them live in just unimaginably terrible conditions. Protections that animals have in other countries don't exist here. So that's the bad news. But the good news is that, you know, every minor victory means huge change for tons and tons of animals. So this is an area where young people, just like myself, right, I'm only a few years out of college, can get involved and start making some serious changes, start impacting the lives of thousands of other beings, you know, who are conscious, who have nervous systems, who are important. So I think it's a really exciting time for young people to get involved in a movement that's growing rapidly. We're seeing laws being passed every year, huge progress being made. It's a really exciting time to get involved.
So how do we get involved?
Great question. Well, the Humane League's Boston office is really active in this area. The vast majority of the work we're doing is done by folks in college, our interns and volunteers. It's as simple as getting in touch. You can look us up on Facebook, go to our website, www.thehumaneleague.com, email me at david@thehumaneleague.com. Follow us on Twitter at the Humane League. You know, all of these are ways, you know, if you just shoot us a note, we're always anxious to get young people on our campaigns, you know, starting to get victories for animals.
Well, thank you for joining us today, David. Thanks for watching this week's Policy Breakdown. Coming up after the break is Poli Talk and tonight's panel on immigration reform. So stay tuned.
For tonight's panel discussion, we want to discuss immigration reform, mainly because we, here at Spin Room, feel it isn't being covered enough. It's lost its momentum in the media and on the Hill, so we're here to remind everyone, comprehensive immigration reform policy still has not been passed.
Joining us on today's panel, we have Citizenship Coordinator for Mira Coalition, Julia Schuster, student member of Understanding Nation and Immigration Through Education, Bianca Padro Ocasio, and finally, Spin Room's own in-studio correspondent, Felix Chen, is back. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you so much.
All right, so first, before we get really into it, let's take a look at the national picture for where immigration reform stands today. So last year, the Senate bill died in the Senate. So now the House is looking to put up a new bill that is mirroring the Senate one. It's looking to provide a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million immigrants in the country today. Of course, they don't have the votes in the House. So what they're doing is doing a discharge petition, wherein they get 218 signatures. Then they can force the bill to the floor for a vote without having to get the entire majority on board. That does mean they need 12 Republicans from the House to sign on, which is looking pretty unlikely right now with the leadership with Cantor and Boehner. So it's looking pretty tricky right now. So Julia, how about you start us off? Where do we go from here? Where is immigration reform headed?
So what we're trying to do in the citizenship program at Mira is working with LPRs, so legal permanent residents, individuals who may be in mixed status families, so maybe they're undocumented individuals in their household or their friends, but they themselves are here legally and they are already on the path to citizenship. So we want to help those people naturalize, have a vote, and be able to if we're not able to move immigration reform this year, they will be able to vote for people to represent them in the House and Senate so that we can get it to pass in the future.
Sure, clearly it's a much deeper issue than people let on. It's not just you're here legally, you're here illegally. Like you said, it's a very complex issue. Felix, how about, again, looking at the national level, what are some, like on the positive side, on the against immigration reform, like how's the issue look?
I really feel like, especially last year, like Senator Rubio, like the Gang of Eight trying to pass the immigration bill, but it failed. So like, I feel like especially with the 2014 election coming up, there are little chance that, this legislature is gonna even be brought up. And especially assuming that Republicans have a good chance of taking the Senate. So you're probably not gonna see this issue being raised for the next couple years at least in my estimate. So I feel like, it's people are going to talk about like they want to do something to change immigration reform, but at least at this moment the momentum has been stopped and there needs to be maybe a coalition on new ideas to be raised and to continue this battle on immigration reform.
Right, and piggybacking off of that, there was a poll released by Gallup in February that actually showed that there's no majority of American citizens that actually think immigration policy is a necessary item on the agenda today. Surprisingly, it's around 35%. So it's a plurality across the board. Bianca, how about you tell us right now, you've been doing some work, particularly with student immigration. Could you first tell us just about what happened with the DREAM Act and what kind of work you're doing right now?
Yeah, of course. I think it's interesting that you say that a lot of people think that it's not an issue that's very pressing for the nation, because I think that the fact that we aren't allowing young immigrants and people who are, they have this thirst for education. They should have the right to be able to go to college and pursue an education and pursue a career. I think that's so important, and I think that a nation that is made up of immigrants should let people do that. But I think that the work that we're doing with Unite, Emerson Unite, we are trying to have Emerson look at our own policies to recruit, admit, retain, and financially support students who are undocumented or who are DACA recipients. And DACA is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And that is sort of like the Band-Aid that's been put on young immigrants so that they can at least have a chance of getting a job and, just like simple benefits.
And since you're working along the lines of education for young immigrants, before Julia was talking about green card holders, especially, and for green card holding younger citizens, what are the sort of educational opportunities that they're allotted? Because obviously we talk about how important education is in the United States. Obviously it's got to be important for those here who are also here with their own green cards. So what are the sort of opportunities that are offered to them?
Well, I mean, I think that a lot of the barriers that stand in the way of young immigrants to pursue an education in the first place is financial barriers, because a lot of, as Julia was talking about earlier, it's so expensive to sort of like go through all of these different like processes of, applying for visas or like applying for citizenship and all of that. So I think that, applying for a school might not be in the immediate priority of a family of mixed status family or like family with undocumented youth. So, right now I feel that private institutions hold a lot of power because they are private, and even though, for example, a school like Emerson, we're like tuition dependent, but we have the power to sort of change our policies in order to make it more inclusive for undocumented immigrants, and, for example, create like a need-based grant or of some sort to allow young immigrants who are undocumented or DACA recipients to apply to a school like Emerson. So, yeah.
Furthering that conversation on cost, I wanted to ask you a question in regards to the fact that many people, obviously, they have their green card, but they don't apply for naturalization or citizenship because it's too expensive. What are some of the ways that the American government could possibly make that more inexpensive for people who possibly want to immigrate to this country?
So I feel like I might want to just separate out two things. Like, one immediate way that things could be easier for people to go from being green card holders to citizens, the naturalization fee is almost $700. So if that was reduced, a lot of people would have the financial ability to move from being green card holders who are eligible in every other way, no criminal history, and being a green card holder for the required number of years, and be able to become citizens, vote, fully contribute economically to the U.S. For people who are abroad and interested in coming to the U.S., I think that might be outside the realm of what Mira is working on at this point. From that end, on the embassy side, and all of the foreign visas, and when you're petitioning for family members who are abroad, that is really expensive and kind of determined by that country you're applying from.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I feel like one of the ways we can actually improve the system is to kind of just reduce the complication of the whole process, because right now the visa, like in order to apply a visa or green card, you have to go through multiple departments, the State Department, the Homeland Security, and even the Labor Department. So like, if we can streamline all those processes, it will make the whole application much easier and probably much more efficient.
So Julia, you mentioned people coming from abroad over. We're still waiting to get family members, and one of a big argument for detractors of immigration reform is that there are still people that are waiting to come over. For instance, there are many Afghan translators that actually helped the United States during the war in Afghanistan that were promised visas for their assistance, and they're still waiting. So I guess one of the arguments today is, why should we help these 11 million people that were here illegally in the first place, over people that were promised from the State Department. So is there a weight to that argument?
I think it's really important to be considering all of the people that America has made promises to. I mean, those individuals, I'm sure, made huge sacrifices in their life and within their families. So I think it's really great that people are drawing attention to that issue. But I think one of the things to keep in mind with this just huge number, 11 million, that these are people that are helping to build America today. They are sending their kids to school along with American citizen children. They are, on our soccer teams. They are helping our elderly. They are packaging our groceries. They are sometimes teaching at universities. They're contributing to American life in so many ways that I think thinking that we can just erase the problem by not giving documentation. It's they're building America, they're creating the narrative of what America is. So we should be respecting that and also not trying to create this permanent underclass within that 11 million.
Yeah, I also think that it's so true that these are the people who we see in everyday lives, and they sort of make up our professors and our soccer teams, like you said. And I think that even more so than the media not covering the immigration issue enough, I think that there's a big problem with the way that we portray and the way that we see undocumented or immigrants in general, because we forget that it's not all about Mexicans who are gardeners or janitors and clean our toilets. It's a lot more than that, and I think that prioritizing who gets to get citizenship faster, or who gets a path to citizenship and who doesn't. I think it's more complicated than that.
Bianca, I guess one of my concerns is about, because at the end of the day, America is still the land of the opportunities. A lot of people want to come to this country, so how could you say no to maybe people living in Africa if they say, oh, I want to contribute to the society, I want to come to the US. So are we going to have an open border? Are we going to just allow everyone who wants to come to the US to come to the US? So what's the end game? Are we allowing 30 million foreigners to come to the US? What do you think about that?
It's true. There's one more argument for this, is that a common idea is that these people have broken the law. So why reward that? And if we provide a pathway to legal status, is that an incentive for other people to come in illegally? So just what's the take on that?
One interesting thing, that's a great question, and I was talking with someone today about how with around 1,000 deportations per day on average under the Obama administration, that means that the people crossing the border, it's almost just a zero with the people crossing and then people getting sent back. So it's kind of the policies.
I'm sorry, I have to cut you off. We have run over time.
Okay.
But this was a great discussion. Thank you all so much for being here, Bianca, Julia, Felix. That's all the time we have for the panel, and we will be right back after this short break with more Spin Room.
We aren't in the business of making sales. In fact, we aren't even getting paid for this gig. We are merely sharing the news we feel isn't covered enough.
So we're not going to report Flight 370 updates or what the Duck Dynasty clan's up to. No, none of that. Instead, we're going to continue to talk about climate change, animal cruelty, and immigration. Maybe we'll throw another Boehner joke in there.
If that sounds appealing at all, join us next time on The Spin Room. Thanks for watching.